All right, Martin, thank you for being with me today to discuss, I think, a really interesting topic.
Hey, Darian, thanks for having me on. And, interesting is one of several hundred adjectives you could throw at this subject.
Well, let's dive into it. I think it's good to just kick off into it. So, um, I was telling you off, before we started recording that, I have a very deep interest in kind of UFOlogy and UFOs and all that stuff. And I think America has a big interest in it and people in general.
Yeah,
So,
well, I wouldn't limit it to America. I think
yeah.
it's of global interest to people. I mean, there are sightings around the world constantly. Historically, if you look at the record, everywhere from South Africa to
Hmm.
England, Scotland, Japan, China, Russia. It's a widespread phenomenon, which is a word I increasingly don't like to use because it's now become kind of the placeholder word
Mm,
for UFOs, UAP,
yeah.
and I think uh, until we get a definitive explanation of what these things are, where they're from, how they're controlled, who controls them, to call it a phenomena, I think just kind of almost marginalizes it in a new
Mm.
way.
What would you say, like, is the narrative, especially in military spaces, it seems like this was something that you didn't talk about and it was considered kind of a taboo thing to discuss. But more and more, at least what I've seen, is that there's been more and more intelligence about this and a more acceptance of discussing it in those areas and in the public knowledge about it.
Well, again, historically, military's gone on record many times about this. They've had several projects going back to the 40s and late 40s and 50s and 60s with Project Grudge, Project Sign. Probably the most famous one is Blue Book, of course.
Hmm.
And, there's a lot of dancing around what these are and what they aren't. But in 19, and I'm going to read my notes here so I get this right, Pentagon General Nathan Twining came out in 1947 and said these things are not of this world. This is from a document that was unearthed in one of several thousand FOIA requests. And he stated that the phenomena reported is something real and not visionary or fictitious.
Mm.
So, there's quite an extensive record on military discussing this. I don't know if you or your audience members tuned in today, but there was a hearing in Washington in the Senate. Um, if I don't have the exact name of the committee, but it was uh, an interview with the new appointee for the Aero
Hmm.
office, which is now investigating these anomalies. And it was very boring. A lot of housekeeping, a lot
Yeah.
of, you know, I guess, bureaucratic speak
Yeah.
about how they're going to track these things, analyze them, use the science. It just, I've been following this since I was a kid,
Yeah.
uh, back in Western North Dakota, who had a sighting with high school buddies one night. And I've been interested in it ever since. I wrote a book about it, obviously, the Space Pen Club.
Hmm.
For someone who's been watching this from the sidelines for so long, at some point, I just think they're never the people in charge of this are never going to come clean on it. And the more time I spend or waste watching, Senator House um, panel discussions on the subject, I losing my patience.
Yeah. I mean, what do you You say you don't think they'll ever come clean about it, which does that mean you think that they have more knowledge than they're letting the public know? That's much deeper than what we
Yeah,
have
I
been
mean,
told.
look, these things have been classified above top secret for,
Mhm.
decades, especially after the alleged Roswell crash in
Mhm.
47. Um, and there's been all sorts of secrecy wrapped up in it. The Robertson panel, which I think was convened in 52, um, was formed to basically address how are we going to deal with this from a public perspective.
Mm.
They were getting all these UFO reports from around the country. Um, so they had to do something. And the strategy that they came up with, and it's been very effective, and it's been in place for, better part of 6 or 7 decades, is to uh, deny that it's a real issue, and two, to ridicule those who report and talk about the subject. And that's been supremely effective. And we're just beginning to see this taken seriously ever since the New York Times published a front page
Yes.
story on the secret Pentagon program from, I believe, 2007 to 2010, that there was a group inside the Pentagon
Right.
headed by Lou Elizondo, who has since become kind of a poster boy for disclosure, if you will. That Times reporting really bust this out from the wink and the nod
Yeah.
crowd. They made it a legitimate topic. There was no mention of conspiracy
Right.
theorists
Right.
or conspiracy in the reporting about this Pentagon group, and which some say still exists, only under a different name now, which wouldn't surprise anybody who's been paying attention to this. So now, you're seeing it on CNN. We had
Yeah.
those pilot testimonials, Ryan Graves on 60 Minutes. I
Right.
mean, it's almost as commonplace as the daily ball scores now.
Yeah, Commander David Fravor, right, and people like that
Yeah,
discussing it for that. And it was a great, I think it was on Hulu. I watched a whole series with the author of the New York Times article, Ryan Graves, and a truckload of people. And they
yeah,
did not present it in a conspiratorial way. It was very much presented in, I think, a palatable way, that it was just in a way that it hadn't been presented before. From a lot of other people. Because if you watch a lot of specials and stuff, it's like, this is kind of weird. The way they're presenting it.
yeah. You get the funky, eerie music and
Right.
the sensational graphics around. I mean, that's all fine and good for show business, but
Sure.
I mean, I think people are more sophisticated these days, and they want to be dealt with on a more sophisticated level, and less with the sort of whiz bang noise making
Yeah.
that goes on whenever this subject is. I mean, there's so many shows about UFOs that have been
Yes.
through the years. Now there's, I think, even more, some very good work being done by people like James Fox and
Mm-hmm.
uh, the guy who did the documentary last year on the sightings, close encounters of the fourth kind event among school children in
Yeah.
Zimbabwe. The guy's name escapes me at the moment. Dr. Stephen Greer,
Yeah.
I have a long history with, which we can get to in a second.
Yeah.
He's made 3 or 4 crowd-funded films, excellent
I've
film.
watched them. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that talks about the secrecy. It talks about Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, talks about the technology, and why this has been such a above top secret subject. So there's
Yeah.
a lot out there. I think it's overwhelming. It's kind of a let the buyer beware, like choose which UFO documentary you're going to watch, and try to use some discernment and get your BS detector out.
That's right. Well, yeah, you mentioned about Stephen Greer. I'm curious about your association with him and why he's such a figure in this community and his work and how that speaks to you. Yeah.
Well, a good part of probably a third of my book, The Space Pen Club, is based on my adventures with Dr. Greer. I was introduced to him in the early 90s and actually came at this whole topic and Dr. Greer himself as a freelance journalist. And I could not get that story told. I think I wrote like a 10-page, couple 3,000 word profile of Greer and the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and his whole Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind initiative, which is basically human-initiated contact with the visitors. He had a whole set of contact protocols
Yeah.
that he had developed, probably based on his own close encounter he had as a young guy hiking in the mountains around Asheville in the Blue Mountains. So I couldn't get the story placed anywhere. Today I could publish it in probably 20 different internet sites.
Yeah.
But back then, this was not a topic of general conversation. I mean, it was way out in the margins. So I was intrigued by Greer's thinking on topic. I still am, even though I haven't had much contact with him in 20 some years. But I became his communications guy, his public relations guy, and we had some interesting experiences in Mexico. And I was involved in publicizing and getting people to the first disclosure event he held in Washington, D.C. in April of 1997. So going way back in the chapters 9 and 10, recall that period and what happened in Mexico and in Washington in pretty good detail. Unfortunately, we had a news crew from CBS's show 48 Hours who was doing a special on the UFO issue, and they shadowed us to Mexico, to the volcano zone, which is about roughly 50 miles from Mexico City. And there's a huge active volcano there and then a silent, dormant one. The active volcano makes the news quite regularly because it tends to fire off plumes, and there's been a ton of UFO sightings around the volcano. Some of the footage is very dramatic. I mean, I would call it incredible.
Wow.
I have a blog about that volcano on the book's website, thespacepenclub.com. The volcano is called Mount Popo, as the locals call it. It's got a longer Aztec name, Popocatépetl, which I'm sure is not the exact pronunciation, but it's the best I can do as a gringo from Minnesota. So a lot of interesting stuff with Greer in the book. I have to say, you're exactly right. He is a major figure in this field. He's also a polarizing figure. He was controversial and something of a pariah even when I met him, and he was just starting his organization in the early 90s, and now he's even more so, that he's become internationally renowned for his research initiative and also for his outspoken comments on the subject. He's also done a hell of a lot of work in uncovering how the secrecy works, why it's in place, and produced a ton of witnesses. He did a 2001 disclosure in Washington, which I was not involved in, but I was very familiar with a lot of the players that he brought to the table during that event. And he's going to do a similar one in June of this year
Okay.
here in Washington, which I'm thinking about going to.
All right. What are to think about this, what are the implications of humans knowing more about this phenomenon, I would say, or these anomalies? How is this going to affect us by knowing more, you think?
Well, that's a really good question. I think the first answer is it's going to change the way we think about energy, propulsion systems, fossil fuel use. You know, if you've got extraterrestrial vehicles, either operated by real occupants or artificial intelligently designed occupants from anywhere in interstellar space, that's a huge game changer on Earth, and it's probably the reason why this has been so secret for so long. It would upset the oil economy that the Western world thrives on and goes to war over, and you know, petroleum underlies I don't know how many products that we use every day without even thinking. So, you know, energy consumption and use and extraction, all that stuff is off the table if we find a way to utilize the technology that's obviously being deployed in these unidentified UFO objects or phenomena. Secondly, and this is probably more of a personal, heartfelt belief, I've always thought it would take something like this to become wider public knowledge, that if we found out we're not alone in the universe, which I always think is kind of a boring, stupid cliche. I mean, there's almost 77 billion people on Earth right now. I mean,
yeah.
How can we be alone in the universe? That many of us running around.
That's an interesting take on that.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that's really totally so
yeah.
You know, vainglorious, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
I've always thought if something like this were to become a known fact, that it would change the way we think and maybe the way we govern and maybe the way we relate to other nation states. It might cause us to get rid of our nuclear weapons, take better care of our environment, which is increasingly becoming you know, Earth is becoming an increasingly overheated planet.
Right.
The UN just 2 years ago issued a code red about the danger the Earth is in, and basically the chief villain in that is fossil fuels.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And I'm sure, you know, that just there's even deeper levels of implications. I'm sure many people have different opinions on that as well. But you brought up something I thought was very interesting. And I've thought of this, which is you said either essentially like biological beings or artificial intelligence. And I don't think people think about it enough that way. They always think of this, you know, little green men or some biological being, but it's very possible covering that vast amount of distance. You would think you're covering an ocean of stars, that it may have to be an AI-based being to potentially survive the trip, you know, unless there was, you know, unless there was wormhole or something that you got to point A, B quickly. But if it was a longer journey, biology may not be the answer on that.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the travel equation is probably more wormhole based or even more complex than that. Maybe they've just figured out how to go from A in deep interstellar space to B in real time with however they do it.
Yeah,
I mean,
however they do it. Yeah.
some of the analysis I've read by Greer and other folks is that um, these crafts and everything can actually move through time.
Hmm.
They short circuit the time space continuum
Wow.
without a lot of problems, and that's why they get here fast and they take off just as quickly.
Yeah. And there's no yeah, you see about the sightings and the lack of identification markers of like a jet or anything like that. There's no sound. All
Right.
these things are just like seem impossible to do for it to be something in the atmosphere that we could explain away for that. But I'm curious what your take is on Bob Lazar. I've seen one of his deals too, and his take about working at Area 51. Is that story? I mean, his story's been consistent for a long time. Is that something you find credible or not credible, or what are your thoughts on it? Yeah.
You know, I don't know about Bob Lazar.
Yeah.
I read a lot about him back in the day. I actually had an opportunity to meet him personally.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Los Angeles one time, and I blew it. I didn't go to the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
A long story, but I don't know. I know a lot of people whose thinking and intellect I respect, and they think he's the real deal. But
Mm.
I also, that said, on the other hand, people like Stanton Friedman, who was kind of the lone prophet in the wilderness, if you will, who talked about the cosmic Watergate for years when nobody
Yeah.
would listen. And Stanton was out there, and Stanton looked into the Lazar story, and like other folks who have couldn't find credentials that stacked up, couldn't find a
Yeah.
paper trail leading back to his studies or even his employment at Area 51. Not that that would be public record, but I don't know. I'm on the fence. I'm
Yeah.
leaning toward probably classic disinformation agent,
Mm.
actor, uh,
Yeah.
like Rich Doty, who is now in the private sector and actually been working with Greer apparently,
Okay.
but after years of spewing misinformation and only being too happy to do so. I mean, that was his job. He
Right.
was the guy in the Air Force down in around Kirkland, um, just putting out all kinds of nonsense about this.
Yeah. What's the best case scenario for you at this point in terms of what's being revealed or what could be revealed, or what would make you feel satisfied, even more satisfied than the progress that's currently happening?
Well, that's a good question too. I spent a lot of time thinking about that, and as we touched on earlier, there's a lot of evidence that points to this as being extraterrestrial in
Mm-hmm.
origin. Um, there's a lot of evidence pointing to it being something interdimensional. I
Right.
don't think the two are mutually exclusive. There might be all kinds of things out there that we don't understand, but I think probably the ET thing is a no-brainer, is open shut. But Greer's collected over 200 witnesses from the military, the intel agencies, the private sector, places like Northrop Grumman
Mm-hmm.
and Skunk Works and other big private companies, corporate companies that do the government's bidding, research and development, etc. Um, I think we're not going to have a true disclosure until what I call the boys upstairs,
Mm.
until they come forward and go, yes, we're here.
Yeah.
watching you guys for a long time. Wow, what a mess.
What a mess. I imagine that too. What a mess. And it makes me also wonder, I was literally thinking this, like, what is your best explanation for why it's seemed to be essentially an observation mission so far? I mean, tons of sightings, but not any obvious contact that all people could observe.
Yeah, uh, that's a good point. I forget who it is in the UFO community that likes to talk about how, the well documented contact cases that seem to stand up with evidence and retroactive research, and over time, those cases are often set out in the boondocks.
Yeah.
There's happened to two guys fishing in Pascagoula, is it Mississippi, or Travis Walton in the
Yeah.
forests of Arizona, or Betty and Barney Hill up in New Hampshire alone
Right.
on a highway road late at night. Uh, the contact cases like that I think, are pretty sturdy, and they're not interacting with
Yeah.
congressional types. Um, and that might be for a reason, might be strategically. I mean, I think we have been surveilled for a long time.
Yeah.
Once they found out we were here, and then once they discovered in the 40s that we had nuclear weapon capabilities now, which we can take into space. It
Yeah.
might be a threat to them too, or to the space environment.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I would think surveillance would be one of the primary objectives of any sort of visitor presence in our neck of the interstellar neighborhood, such as
Yeah.
it is.
Right. I mean, there's cases too, or observations of unidentified objects around nuclear facilities and strange
Yeah,
things happening. And it makes me think that there's certainly maybe an agenda of like, hey, this is not cool. Like, like should not be happening, guys.
yeah. The nuclear cases are very well researched.
Right.
Several books. One book by Robert Hastings, you might want to have your audience pick up.
Yeah.
Didn't come out too long ago. I devote an entire chapter, I think chapter 4 in my book, looks at the Minot, North Dakota
Hmm.
incursion of a large object that not only uh, caused a panic on the ground, but the object was apparently able to move 20-ton concrete block off a missile silo without a lot of effort, and scramble the launch codes.
Right.
Now, similar things happen at Maelstrom. The
Right.
Minot thing was in 68. Maelstrom, I think, was right around the same period. I think in Maelstrom there were two occasions, but I mean, this is the kind of stuff the congressional folks should be looking at. They should take a jump from all this housekeeping stuff, like, oh, we have to have our sensors in place. We have to we have to
Yeah.
look at all the data and
Uh,
find coordinating matches. I mean, it's just, come on.
yeah.
We're beyond that. Let's get beyond that. Otherwise it just looks like a dog and pony show. I mean,
Yeah.
this hearing today was a complete waste of my time. Anyone else
Mm.
that watched it, um, I mean, the UFO crowd's gonna pull all their hair out before there's any sort of disclosure or any real public acknowledgement that this is happening. Um, but the nuclear incursion cases, Bob Salas is another guy. I think he
Yeah.
was stationed at Malmstrom. Bob has been very vocal on this. I think has he written a book? I can't remember, but he's been part of several witness events in Washington. and has written some opinion pieces here and there, and just saying, this this has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
Why don't you look here instead of over here at all this bureaucratic framing of what we should be doing with the phenomenon, the study of the phenomenon.
You also think that some of this acceleration is due to increased technological advancement of things like cell phones, smartphones, people capturing things much easier than they used to be able to capture footage of these things, and just people's like global knowledge increasing because people are connected to it. It's like hard to deny things when so many people are seeing stuff, and it's more rapid potentially.
Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on. It's misidentified. And I mean,
Yeah.
I almost like the old-fashioned witness testimony and photographs and early videos of these things as opposed to today, because technology has advanced at a really rapidly wicked rate, and for all of the advantages it brings to capture more of the real thing in the skies overhead, there's also the same technology at our disposal to create all kinds of fakes. And
Right.
I mean, I don't even look at videos anymore on the internet about when people post stuff. I'll look at stuff out of Mexico around the volcano because I've been there. There's a whole chapter on our CSETI, Dr. Greer's organization, going down there with this 48 hours crew to try to make contact, close encounter of the fifth kind. I look at those videos because I think they're, number one, they're unaltered, and number two, I know for a fact there's activity there, as I've been there, talked to local people who live there, and some of whom had really good video footage themselves that they'd shot in the 90s. So yeah, I don't know.
It's a good point.
We have all this technology at our fingertips, but we also have all this technology at our fingertips to, just make junk.
Yeah, I mean, and that gets into like deep fakes. I mean, whether it's with humans or objects, things will become indistinguishable from reality in many ways. So how can you trust if it's an actual sighting put up on a video,
And to your point, now we have these off-the-shelf AI applications that are seemingly every effing where.
Everywhere.
I mean, just in the last few months, it seems like you can't escape an application. What's it called? I forget the acronym. But people are using it to create this fake photography, dazzling designs. I mean, on my own personal Facebook image, I have used some sort of space rainbow thing created by AI because it's so beautiful. I threw it up there. I needed to change my my profile picture or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
I mean, this stuff is so widespread now, and it's going to become even more widespread.
Yeah.
And it's going to become an even greater problem to discern, what's real and what's been created artificially for whatever reason, for whatever strategy. So yeah, let the buyer beware.
So it could be harder actually to believe in what's out there on some level if it's viewed through these lenses, whether it's a video post, hey, I saw something, how do you know if it's verified that it's actually what was shot or if it was just created for that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's a rabbit hole that never ends, and unless you have time and resources to go do your own private investigation. I mean, I don't. I don't know anyone personally that does. I mean, in that case, I would trust the different MUFON chapters around the country, which does a pretty good job of investigating sightings and saying this was a real sighting versus this was a complete non-sighting,
Yeah.
misidentity again. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, do I sound frustrated a little?
Yeah, just a little bit, Martin. Just I think anybody who cares deeply about this for a variety of reasons, it's like, come on, like, let us discern what this means. If this is what it is, let people make up their minds about what that means personally to them for that. And I understand what you're saying, like with the economy aspect of it, the oil, petroleum, but I mean, there has to be more than just that. And that's why I say it's a deeper thing within people about the search for extraterrestrial life. And there's something deeper in humans that is activated when you discuss that I think people really
Well,
find very compelling.
yeah, it creates a whole new world of possibility.
Yes.
And, my book is called sort of enigmatically the Space Pen Club. And I'll just give you the short readout on that. There is a real Space Pen Club that was started by some of my college buddies at the St. John's University here in Minnesota, out in the woods. The Fisher Space Pen Company is based in Nevada. They've been making these pens that write in space. The first pen to write in space. Astronauts have used them through the years. They manufacture different models of the space pen every year. There's a actual space pen model on the cover of my book. See if I can show you right here.
Oh, nice.
That's a space pen. And some people will go, no, that's a UFO.
I can
That's a
see why they
flying
say that.
saucer. No,
Yeah.
that's a space pen. No, that's a flying saucer. It could
Yeah.
be both.
Yeah.
Anyway, the space pen. Oh, here I have one right in front of me too.
Nice. Look at
The
that.
one we use for the cover. They're great
Fantastic.
pens, but it was started kind of as a joke among us, and then it became a thing, became this iconic representation of possibilities. If a pen that can write in outer space and underwater and across greasy surfaces, what else could it do? I mean, what are the possibilities?
Yeah.
And that's how I think of the whole UFO issue. What are the possibilities if we had an actual disclosure process and we found out that interstellar space was capable of achieving without the sort of propulsion systems, primitive propulsion systems
Yeah.
we use today. No, thank you, Elon Musk.
Right.
What are the potentials? What are the possibilities of that? And I've heard Chris Mellon, who used to be inside the Defense Department under a couple of different presidents, Republican and Democrat, along with Lou Elizondo. I mean, these are the two guys who become kind of the public face of disclosure, since they are both from the establishment that guards these secrets, and now they're pushing for disclosure. Chris Mellon has said basically the same thing, that I think it would change the way we think and behave toward each other. Although I have to admit, more frustration. Spoiler here. When the Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine last year, I went, we're never going to get this right.
Right.
We're never going to get it right.
Yeah.
So maybe, that's Pollyannish thinking, that it would change things, but I think if it doesn't, we might be deeper into the doo-doo than we care to admit.
Right. Most definitely. Gosh, I have to tell you, it's refreshing to have these type of conversations in a very intelligent way, actually. And
well, thanks, Darian. I appreciate the good line of questioning. And,
thank you.
You and I are both probably not ever going to walk away from this completely.
No. But I mean, it's like, at least I feel like there's some level of progress, some level. that is not some weird documentary, like you said, with crazy graphics and strange people. It feels like it is becoming a little more legitimate and focused on, like in the documentary I saw, was all about like, well, we should treat this as a security threat, as
Yeah,
airspace
could
security.
be. It
Why are
could
we not
be.
looking at it this way, at least on this level? To they're not saying let's look at it as aliens, let's look at it as a security threat, at least, if nothing else. Like, we need to know what this is
Well,
actually.
the military knows it's a security threat,
Yeah,
but they also know it's a security threat that they can't do anything about it.
that's
I
right.
mean, the capabilities are way beyond what we have on the ground here.
Yeah.
And I know, in the same breath, Steve Greer and others have said, these visitors show no net hostile intention on their part. So I think that needs to, we need to hear from that choir
Yeah.
off and on, just to keep an open mind and a balanced
Right.
perspective.
Most definitely. Well, please tell everyone again about Space Pen Club book, how they can connect with you, the whole deal.
Well, you can buy the book through Amazon. That's the easiest way. There's a real simple link at the book's website, thespacepenclub.com. There's some great reviews of the book, including one from Dan Aykroyd, who's been into the subject
Yeah,
probably longer than you and I put
that's
together.
right.
And there's also an ongoing blog on that site. I try to write at least once a month, and sometimes twice. I'll probably blog about the hearing today, although I was so bored through the whole may not do anything at all. But
Right.
and then I have a small Facebook group page called the Space Pen Club. You can join that. A lot of people post things they're interested in. We have some good discussions there. Occasionally I'll post something on Instagram, so watch for stuff there, and keep your eyes on the skies.
Keep your eyes on the skies. Thank you, Martin Keller. I appreciate your
Hey, thanks,
time.
Darian. Appreciate it a lot.